Hello and welcome back to The Big Rissue. I'm Jack Kelly and I'm joined by Ben Blissett.
Hello.
And Rory Taylor.
Hello.
How are you both doing?
Great,
Very
fantastic.
good.
It's been 365 days since Rishi Sunak first entered number 10 as Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And we've been loyally tracking ever since, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
a bit
sure.
of a gap
That's,
at one
that's,
point,
that's
but-
what's happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't spot the gap.
No.
We said we'd come back for his year review. We stopped doing the big issue at 100 days. That was the original remit. And then we said we'd come back once it had been a year. It's now been a year.
Yeah.
So in today's episode of the TLDR Podcast, we're having a big Rissue crossover.
Yeah,
the main
love it.
story today is going to be reviewing Rishi Sunak's first 365 days in office.
We're like an HR department, just like reviewing how he's
Yeah.
doing, like tracking his progress.
Will we give him a pay review?
Yeah.
Probably.
He doesn't
have
need.
that authority.
Yeah. He doesn't need any more money.
But we'll also be discussing underreported stories as always, and we'll be updating the world leaderboard at the end of the episode. So first, let's talk about underreported stories, and let's start with yours, Ben.
Yeah, so obviously last week I sort of went a little bit further than the UK. This time we're coming right back to the UK. Sorry, I do have a niche. And basically right before we started recording this podcast, Shabab Khan from ITV News has suggested that there's a couple of shadow cabinet ministers that have considered resigning over Starmer's handling of the Gaza situation.
Ooh.
Now, the story isn't necessarily just that, it's just the wider ongoing crisis within Labour about their approach to the Israel-Gaza situation. You know, in the last few days, I think it was 15 Labour, Scotland, I think it was councillors or officers, but some senior members within the party resigned over the handling of the Gaza situation. Specifically, they were resigning because they tried to propose a cessation of Israel military action, the establishment of humanitarian corridors, and the release of hostages. But they were blocked by the General Secretary in the Scottish Party from making those motions, saying that they're blocking any motions relating to Israel and Gaza. So it's this sort of ongoing tension within the Labour Party as to exactly how to deal with this situation going on. If there are ministerial resignations, this could be the biggest challenge that Starmer's faced, probably in his leadership. And, you know, people have been speculating, not least myself, that Labour are going to win the next election. You know, they are 20 points ahead. But if they can't keep a grip on the party, and if party management starts slipping, then you could see polling numbers start to decline as well. So that's the big fear for Labour. So it's just trying to keep a hold of this, trying to keep a hold of party management. So the underreported story isn't specifically any one of those things. It's just the fact that it's looking like there could be quite a big problem facing Starmer if he doesn't get a hold of this soon. So I guess we'll have to see.
Interesting. Rory, what's yours?
Well, Ben, you've absolutely done me there.
No way.
Had the exact same underreported story.
It's not that underreported then, is it? If you both showed up with it.
I almost always do global ones.
Yeah.
But I thought I'd do a UK one. So, yeah, I can add a few things, I think.
Go on.
Okay.
So today as we record, I think Starmer is meeting with a group of Muslim Labour MPs who have taken issue with the stance he's taken since the kind of most recent conflict in Gaza broke out. So we'll see how that goes. But kind of every indication is that they're very unhappy. One, with that statement he made about Israel's right to defend itself and whether Israel could and should cut off, effectively besiege the Gaza Strip. We covered that in last week's episode.
Yeah.
But also now this fact that Labour haven't yet called for a ceasefire ceasefire between the Israeli military and Hamas.
Yeah.
Israel continues to bombard Gaza. It's kind of mirrors this debate that's happening at the UN as well, where the US opposes a ceasefire, but they do support humanitarian pauses, which is like not a full ceasefire because it's not long term and it's kind of less formal.
Yeah.
It's just a little window to put censor-made in before firing can start again. So that's the kind of internal debate going on in Labour. I think there was also one other story that I thought was interesting related to this. Amid all this backlash to Starmer, he went and visited an Islamic centre. I think it might have been in Cardiff, but don't quote me on that.
Sure.
And he did a big post saying, it was great to meet with this community and we discussed this and then I told them this and blah, blah, blah. And the centre ended up putting out their own statement basically saying they don't agree with Starmer's take and he misrepresented what the actual conversation was at the in his meeting with them, which obviously isn't great
Not
for him.
great look,
So it's a bit of a mess for him at the moment. But as I said, there's this meeting going on today. I don't know if he'll come out of that having appeased that that group that he's meeting with, or if they'll continue to be disappointed by his stance, or if he'll take a stronger stance against Israel, or we'll have to wait and see. But at the moment, it's looking like a bit messy.
Yeah. Okay.
Double underreported there.
Yeah. So underreported.
It's overreported now.
It is. It kind of is. Yeah. I don't want to hear you talk about it again, either of you. We're done with that now. Okay, so let's move on to the main story of today, and that is Rishi Sunak's first year in office. How is it going for him? It's been a year. Has it been a good year?
So I think there's just quite a lot to dig into here. I think the thing that everyone has to bear in mind with this is the state of things that he took over from. So if we're comparing it to Truss, realistically, it's been an okay year.
Okay.
Party management's sort of back on track. But I suppose that's probably the most that you can say, to be fair. I mean, look, to be blunt, it was a particularly bad situation that he took over from. The economy was flagging. It looked like, gilt yields were causing knock-on effects to the wider economy. Party management is bad. He's broadly got the economy back under control. Party management is broadly back under control. Unfortunately for him, though, he's struggling to sort of put his mark on his role as Prime Minister.
Sure.
He's had some big policies. So obviously there is the Northern Ireland Protocol. Yeah, which was sort of praised across the board. Other than that, though, nothing massive. He's still fighting to get the economy under control. He's not quite sorted that yet. There are still backbenchers who are unhappy with him, and he's still struggling a bit with party management. Yeah. But broadly speaking, if we're comparing him to obviously the Truss era in which he came on, it's been an improvement from that.
Okay.
But if we're comparing him to any other Prime Minister, he's doing incredibly badly.
Rory?
Yeah, I think you can only judge it based on the polling, because ultimately the real test will be when he comes to an election, and if the polling bears out how it is, the voters are judging that he's doing a bad job. And I think Ben's got more data that we'll go into at some point, I think. But I remember when we did the 100-day review, I think I skimmed through it just now, and we were saying things like, he's not done anything worse than we expected him to do, given the situation he was put into, but he's not doing well.
Sure.
And it's this weird situation where I don't know what I don't think I expected any more from him. Okay. But I also think he's doing badly. Okay. And that's not like a personal judgment on him. I just mean in the short window of time that he has to be Prime Minister. And what he kind of took on. I don't know what he could have done as realistically could have done as a Conservative Prime Minister that would have really turned things around for him.
Ben says that the primary thing he's achieved thus far is achieving better party unity. Yeah. Do you think there's anything else notable that he has achieved?
And the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Windsor Framework.
Sorry. Yes, Windsor Framework. Apologies.
Good work, Rory.
Yeah, I mean, he put out a flashy video celebrating his achievements, and
he did.
It was about 40-something seconds long, but they did very quick fire through the achievements because they had so many to fit in.
To be fair to him.
But some of them, Windsor Framework was in there. Yeah. They mentioned ending the teacher strikes was one thing. They mentioned halving inflation is on track by the end of the year, that type of thing.
Okay.
So he has done some things, and some of his goals have been met or are on target.
Yeah.
But it was interesting with that kind of quick fire thing of the things he has achieved. I kind of stopped every half a second to look at each one, and some of them were just things that haven't actually happened yet. There was things like banning the XL bully dog, which they haven't actually done. They said they're going to. They just need to define the breed. So that hasn't happened. I don't think you can count that as an achievement. He also listed the smoke-free generation thing, which was just a policy he announced in a speech that hasn't happened and may not happen because it's going to be a free vote.
Yeah.
There was also the new A-levels, which was another thing he announced in that speech, but likely won't happen if he's out of office next year sometime. I think his own list of achievements probably should be shorter than he kind of put out. Yeah.
And the fact that it's being bumped, the stuff's being added to make it reach 40 seconds does back up the point that maybe the list isn't all that long.
I mean, if you look at legislative achievements, they have passed some big bills.
Okay.
I mean, it's not the Nationality and Borders Act, it's the illegal Migration Act, that type of thing. But whether you judge that as a success or not is difficult, because yes, they passed it in the same way that yes, they passed the Nationality and Borders Act a year or two beforehand, but has it actually worked?
Okay.
Not really.
Yeah. And that's what people care about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it hasn't been he hasn't done nothing, but equally the things he's done.
I do find it interesting because we've been hiring recently, and if someone was to come with an application and say, you know, and we ask them, what have you done? And they put on their application, well, I've written a lot of TLDR videos, you know, all this. It's like that wouldn't be acceptable.
Well, so I plan to.
Yeah, I plan to. Yeah,
I've announced that I will be.
Yeah, it's not a thing. But no, I sort of agree with you. You know, as you say, there have been some big legislative changes, but to be fair, they haven't seemed as sort of quick as like the Johnson era.
Yeah.
Again, irrespective of what you think about any of the bills, Johnson had quite a lot of like massive police crimes courts and sentencing. Nationality and borders, online safety, etc., and they were coming in quite quickly. Whereas the only real big one I can think of is illegal migration.
Yeah, there was also the
and obviously
minimum
still
safety level bill, that type of thing. I think a lot of the ones that, well, some of the ones that Sunak have done are like carryovers from previous prime ministers' parliamentary sessions.
Online safety is a good example of that. Yeah.
Those are the limited successes. Are there any notable failures of things that he said he would done or ought to have done, do you think? Is there any even area of policy which you think he's undervalued or not given enough attention to?
It's tricky. I mean, the biggest, most obvious, and I know we've mentioned this, and I suppose we're going to go into this in quite a bit more detail soon, hopefully, but polling is the big failure, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, he was expected to sort of come back from the Truss era when she was about 20 points behind, and people were hoping that he'd maybe not go into positive numbers, but at least close that gap slightly.
Sure.
And that hasn't happened. Legislatively, you know, I think most people, and this is what goes back to what we were saying about expectations. I don't think people had too many expectations because his job as Prime Minister was very much party management and economy.
Yeah.
They were the two things. No one expected him to be like a big Blair, you know, coming in with this massive change agenda. It's very much trying to fix the problems of the previous Prime Minister. So, you know, there's nothing, it's all to do with expectation really, and I don't think anybody expected him to go in and have some big policy area that he should have been sorting out. You know, on the economy, it's definitely got better. It's not perfect yet, and the forecasts, especially from the Institute for Government, expect that things like inflation and growth will be a lot better towards the latter half of next year. So he's certainly on track to improve those. But as I say, I don't think there's many areas in which, you know, I was expecting him to go in to improve it, and he hasn't, because I was sort of mainly expecting party management in the economy. Just one other thing as well. So obviously we spoke earlier, we touched on the Windsor Framework, which was obviously seen sort of cross-party as a success. But one of the failures in that is that power sharing in Northern Ireland still not happening. There's a major difficulty. So that is something that he hasn't resolved yet. So if we're talking about things that he probably could and should have paid more attention to or tried to fix, I think that's a sort of glaring one.
Could you also make the argument for migration? It's something he's put at the centre of his agenda. It's an issue which is very important to the voting base for the Conservatives, and yet numbers are still heading in the wrong direction from their perspective. Numbers are still getting higher. Well, I don't think the electorate are satisfied on that.
I think it's a difficult one for him because he faces the same challenges that his predecessors did on that. Yeah. I think at this point, the number of channel crossings this year is lower than the same period last year. But his pledge was to stop the boats, which kind of implies completely stopping them. So I guess he's not on track to do that. Yeah. But like with previous prime ministers, his plans are just caught up in legal battles because the government is taking this approach where they're going right up to the line or beyond the line of legality in their approach to trying to stop the boats, that any plan they have is not going to come into force until it goes through the courts or until those challenges are made and settled. So he's still at a point where no planes have gone through Rwanda, and there's talk about them scheduling another one for next year, but ultimately the Supreme Court will decide whether or not that is legal or not. It's this strange thing where he made stopping the boats and migration this big part of his 5 priorities, but hasn't really been able to do much. Okay. There was a debate in Parliament the other day where Labour was saying, yes, the numbers are slightly down last year, but that's because of the weather conditions. And then the government was saying, actually, no, the weather conditions were worse this year, blah, blah, blah. So there's all these debates going about that kind of thing, but ultimately it's still a challenge for the government, and their kind of flagship policies haven't actually taken off at all.
Anything else? We don't, if not, then...
No, not on that.
So that's kind of the good and bad of it from a policy perspective and from a political perspective when we're looking at the real kind of like nuts and bolts of it. But as you've alluded to already, Ben, and as is kind of obvious, what really matters is how this reflects on the electorate and how the electorate responds to it. So it's a mixed bag at best when it comes to his performance. He's maybe met expectations. He's maybe fallen short of them when it comes to a political perspective. But what does the electorate think? Are they impressed by his first year or not?
Again, I'll start with a very blunt answer and then explain. No,
Okay.
no is the
Okay.
answer. They're not. They're not impressed. So we'll start with voting intention. So when Truss was in, it was we'll start at the end of Boris Johnson's tenure. At the end of Boris Johnson's tenure, polling suggested that only about 50% to about 55% of those who voted Tory in 2019 would still vote Tory. So they've lost basically half of their voters.
That's quite a lot, yeah.
So that was quite high. About 20% of those said that they were going to vote for a different party, and about 20% said of those that left that they don't know who they're going to vote for yet.
Okay.
That dipped to 40% under Liz Truss. I mean, both of those other numbers of voting for other parties and don't knows both increased to about 27%. So that went up. Rishi Sunak's managed to keep the number of people saying they don't know who they're going to vote for below 25% now. So it's decreased slightly, but it's still suggesting that only about 27% of Tory voters from 2019 said that they'd vote for the Tories again. It's really not looking good.
So he hasn't swung the pendulum in a way that's like,
no,
thank goodness we've got rid of Liz Truss. We can now go back to the Tories.
And one of the interesting things is where people are going. So under Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, quite a lot of them were going to the Lib Dems and Labour, but now 10% of people who said they'd voted Tory in 2019 are saying they'd vote for Reform UK.
Yes.
Now, when you're looking at constituencies and swing constituencies, that could make a difference.
It would have made a difference in both by-elections.
It would have made a difference in both by-elections, exactly. So on that's not great. When we're talking about Rishi Sunak sort of personal, people, how they see him, it's really bad. Genuinely, if you think that's bad, it only gets worse. So all of these things that I'm just going to read out, the first number I'm going to give you is when he first became Prime Minister, and the second number is now.
Okay.
So how things have changed. So all of these are the net values. So when asked about how he's dealing with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, last year it was plus 3%. So overall, people thought he was dealing positively. It's now minus 17.
Wow. Okay.
Defence was minus 4%. It's now minus 26%. Managing the economy, it was plus 14%. It's now minus 31%. Law and order was minus 12%. It's now minus 36%. Education was minus 18%. It's now minus 37%. It goes up. I mean, one of the worst takeaways here. So, in terms of policy focuses, we'll go with the main three that people are concerned about. Yeah. So the economy. So last year, so the phrasing is the cost of living, but cost of living last year was minus 11%. It's now minus 49%.
Wow.
So the second most important issue to voters, I believe, is the NHS. Is that
probably?
That's plausible. I think it is. So it was minus 25%. It's now minus 51%. And then immigration as well, minus 29%. It's now minus 58%. People, since he's become Prime Minister, people think he's a lot less competent in major policy areas. Yeah. And this is reflected in other polling as well. Labour are ahead on trust on the economy, which is unprecedented. Labour never, and
especially
immigration
for a
and asylum.
Chancellor.
And immigration and asylum.
Yeah.
Which is something that the Tories seem to think that's their policy area, and they're behind on that as well. Since he's become Prime Minister, I think obviously you're put under the spotlight a lot more, and I think he was really helped in the COVID era. He was the nice chancellor giving away lots of money to lots of people, and he fostered this image of economic competence and someone that is legislatively competent as well. Yeah. But since he's become Prime Minister, I think attitudes have changed, which is why you see these massive change in these huge numbers in terms of.
I suppose even in his role as Chancellor originally under Boris Johnson, he kind of emerged from being off the radar for a majority of people to suddenly being in number 11, where he was able to just seem kind of broadly competent, especially kind of next to the chaos of late era Johnson. He seemed like a stable pair of hands. He then obviously lost against Liz Truss, but then very relatively quickly bounced back. It's like, you can see why the public broadly had confidence in him and probably also didn't know that much about him. And now, as you say, being put under the spotlight, rightly or wrongly, exposes him to a bunch more scrutiny.
And I think when we get to an actual election campaign, we haven't seen him in election mode, really. So that could, I guess there's a world in which that could save him. But realistically, that could really even hurt him a lot more because he hasn't demonstrated an ability to like hit Labour where it hurts and kind of boost his own support. Because on things like immigration, that they thought that was how they can beat Labour, but
I'd say we've got limited evidence so far of what he's like in a campaign period, but the evidence we do have isn't particularly good. Whenever he's on radio talk shows and someone calls in, he sometimes comes across as like a bit bored. He does eye rolls. He's not great at interacting with members of the public when they're criticising him. And I think that's broadly true with journalists as well. Sometimes they can get under his skin, and I think that in a long bruising campaign period, which next year is almost certainly going to be. It's going to be very difficult. I mean,
he didn't even win either of the leadership campaigns, really. I mean, he won the second one by default, but the first one he didn't.
No, exactly. So no, I think he is going to struggle. I really do.
There was an interesting article in the Financial Times, I think, by Stephen Bush about Sunak keeps coming up with political approaches to dealing with his problems rather than policy ones. So. Over the last year or so, I don't know the actual numbers, but there's been reshuffles. They've replaced the Conservative Party chair. There's been all sorts of things, different, pledges and announcements and things. But fundamentally, the issues are that people still feel burdened by the cost of living. The NHS still isn't performing as it should be. Other public services are struggling. Just on every metric, things like people don't see the country as functioning, and you can't just keep doing your kind of Westminster political response to that. You've got to turn those things around to actually get people to think, maybe you're doing a good job. But he hasn't done that so far, and there isn't really time for him to do that over the next year, if we assume that's when the election will be.
Yeah. So not great.
No,
is the TLDR.
Yeah, I think it's been. I think if I'm giving a very short summary, it's just that he's doing better than his predecessor. But very badly if you compare him to literally any other prime minister.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
Brutal.
Well,
Let's see if any other world leader is doing better or worse as we head to the world leader leaderboard.
Yeah.
Hey! Play the song.
Bring in the board. Bring on the board.
Okay, so 3 more winners, 3 more losers. Potentially new people entering the wall, potentially people moving.
Whoa.
The one notable thing for video viewers, because audio viewers are confused during the segment anyway, so just don't worry. You just continue to be confused. We have added a new middle row because there were complaints that there wasn't a neutral and that you would immediately go from slightly good to slightly bad, which doesn't necessarily feel fair. So we've added a new middle row. No one can be added the middle row. No one can enter the wall in a neutral. You still have to enter slightly good or slightly bad. But if you get pushed from there, you're being pushed into the neutral zone.
Hopefully we'll clear up that very busy, slightly bad section.
Hopefully a little bit.
We'll see.
Let's start with... Do you want to start with good or bad people of the week?
I think we usually start with bad so we end on a high.
Let's start with bad. Let's start with Rory.
Oh, okay. Mine is someone who I'm shocked isn't on the board already. Donald J. Trump, former US president. So he's going to have to be fit on there somewhere in
Just
a slightly bad section.
Yeah.
He's having a bad week because despite still being a Republican frontrunner, he obviously, we all know he's got a lot of legal problems at the moment, but in the last week or so, a lot of his former lawyers, aides, associates and so on have started flipping and taking plea deals, meaning they are kind of getting a lighter sentence and cooperating with prosecutors, which ultimately is bad for Trump because it means that the prosecutors kind of picking off his outer circle and maybe an inner circle to the point where they can really nail him, I think. So it's not looking good for him on that front.
No. Not superb. Ben, who's your loser of the week?
Well, they're already on there. They're moving down. It's Keir Starmer.
Whoa!
I think I moved him up last week, so I'm.
No, you moved him down last week.
Did
he was up there with
he was
with
up
Joe.
with Biden.
Well.
You're desperate to drag him down.
Yeah. It's because of the underreported story, his...
Yeah, and now it's been reported.
I think you moved him down for that exact reason last week.
Well, it's
as well.
gotten worse since then, so I think I'm justifying it on that basis. But I got some criticism for that last week as well because the podcast went out on the days of by-elections, and the podcast went out.
Yeah.
He won 2 by-elections with the biggest swing in post-war history. and I moved him down one.
And you're still doing it again, and you're not.
I'm doing it again.
You
There's
better-
no by-elections this week.
You
so
could
I can't
put him
do
up,
the
but no one ever got the opportunity to push him up from the by-elections. By-elections are within the last week, though.
That is true.
You could push him up again for by-elections now if you want to redeem yourself.
No, I don't.
Okay, well, spoilers.
This is
It's
sorry.
interesting. I think you also moved him right up to the top, but he has had.
He's had
had
the most
highs and
movement.
highs, and now he's heading down. But
He's still in positives.
oh yeah, he's doing better than
You
a lot of
know?
other people.
I'm moving someone down not because of their performance this week, especially it just felt like it had to be done for this episode.
Mhm.
Rishi Sunak has had a bad year. Rishi Sunak is moving down
that's
one.
fair.
It's just, it had to be. We couldn't end this episode.
We couldn't
but
have spent the whole time having a go at him and then leaving him there.
Exactly. No particular thing, but I feel like that ought to be reflected on the board.
Yeah, that's fair.
Rory, who's your person going up this week?
I think Ben and I have the same person.
Okay.
We do.
Somehow we've doubled up on underreported and
This is
good week
unbelievable.
people.
I know.
You're just sharing work
Well,
to
hive mind.
avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
since
they
you-
jump straight to the hallowed King Charles and Vladimir Putin.
I think that is how it works.
Yeah, it is.
Boom, there
So
we
it's
go.
the Prime Minister of Sweden, Ulf Kristersson,
Yeah.
who he's going up because Turkey, or President Erdogan of Turkey, has finally submitted the Swedish NATO application to the Turkish Parliament for ratification. It hasn't officially gone through. There's still other barriers. Hungary's got to do the same, but it is probably the biggest step towards Sweden joining NATO that we've had in quite a while after a long delay. So that's good for him because, well, they're finally getting it done.
Yeah.
He's had a difficult time effectively since becoming Prime Minister. There's lots of difficulties, including recently this big crime wave, but this is a bit of good news for him.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ben, same reason?
Exactly the same reason. It's to do with he's getting closer to being NATO passing.
And he's getting closer to Papa Biden at the top of the board.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Once he joins, he'll be up there.
He probably will be,
Yeah.
to be fair. He's going to get bumped by at least one person, realistically, when they do join.
Probably another double.
Imagine
Maybe.
if he
He's
pops off the top of the board.
Yeah.
I am choosing someone that big TLDR EU fans will be very familiar with. It is Sarah Wagenknecht.
Oh.
Did you have a pronunciation guide?
No, and I think I actually said it wrong. I think it's necked. I think I put too much emphasis in the kn.
Okay.
I have notes, but essentially...
Did you write the notes?
I wrote the notes. Yeah, I wrote the
Okay.
notes. Who do you think wrote the notes?
Zach.
Zach didn't write the notes.
Okay.
Zach doesn't write notes for himself. He writes the notes in the podcast.
That's
while it
true.
goes on.
That's so true.
If you don't know who she is, she's a prominent left-wing politician in Germany, very vocal, very popular. She was formerly a member of Die Linke, which is the left-wing party, not the mainstream left-wing party, but one of the left-wing parties, a fairly prominent one. Anyway, she left Die Linke recently and announced on Monday that she's starting her own party. Now, this is interesting for a number of reasons, but primarily because her new party is likely to pull votes away from AfD, despite AfD being a fairly right-wing party, because both sides, despite being left and right, are broadly anti-immigration and actually tonally are relatively similar. Their ways they react to these things aren't necessarily identical, but the kind of protest vote that both sides could potentially pick up could see them pulling away some of the AfD's support, who, by the way, are sitting at 22% at the moment, which is kind of crazy. Anyway, I thought it was fun that the new party she's forming is called the Sarah Wagenknecht Coalition, or BSW in German, which means it's the first German party in the post-war era to be built around a single figurehead.
That's
And also
interesting.
got to be one of few in Europe where it's named after
yourself.
someone.
Yeah.
Like, what's the succession plan there?
Yeah.
I guess you just change what BSW stands to for something else. You just make it up.
Weird, very odd bit of trivia here, but there's a party in Montenegro that's named after the two leaders, and it's called I think his name's Dritan, and there's another one. I can't remember his name, and it ends in an exclamation mark.
Oh, I like that.
Very Balkan politics.
I don't think
Love
got
it.
exclamation
Put an
mark.
exclamation
Love
mark
it.
in. Yeah.
Anyway, two other things quickly to note. Sorry, I've got notes, so I'm actually trying today.
Yeah, what else has Zach said?
Zach didn't say any of this. The only major poll that's been conducted thus far is by Build, and that found that 27% of voters would consider voting for this new party, even though they essentially know nothing about the policy platform, which is obviously good news for her, hence her moving up on the wall.
Yeah.
And it's also very bad news for her own party, because it's likely that with members defecting, they will fall below the necessary minimum to qualify as a party, and they'll be reclassified as just a group and not not a party,
Wow.
in which case they get fewer rights and fewer accesses and stuff like that, which is very bad for her old colleagues, which is probably why they're all jumping ship and joining her on the wall.
Wow, it's a good one.
Well, thank you. That's very interesting.
You're welcome. That was...
And thank you, Zach.
It wasn't Zach. That was the political world leader league table. We'll be back again next week for more people on the wall, more news, more underreported stories, or maybe even just story.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll see you then.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.